Hello, this is Brian recording an interview with Rican Rage, aka Tani Pantoa Tucker, and she's been kind enough to answer our questions that we developed in the race and roller derby class. So I'm just going to preface this, Rican, by saying that we read a lot of stuff about roller derby, and the students have questions that have to do with roller derby in general and your experience in it, but they also have questions dealing with your experience of how races is perceived in roller derby communities. So the first question that they had is what drew you into roller derby versus playing other sports?
Well, I guess when I first learned about roller derby, I was in a fitness class, a Zumba fitness class, and there was this really tall girl in our class who I saw all the time, and she had a little logo on her shirt, and I was asking her about it while we were waiting for the class to start, and she was like, "Oh, I play roller derby," and I was like, "I've never heard of that," and she's like, "Well, you should come check it out." She handed me a flyer, and it was around March. And I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And I came to one of the practices and everybody was really nice. And my thought was kind of, oh, I can do that. That seems easy.
Very cool, very cool. So just meeting somebody at another fitness type of event. Okay, very cool. So the second question, who is or was your biggest inspiration in the roller derby community?
Well, I never watched any other teams play. I was just within our league, so I would have to say that Anomaly is one of my bigger influences, mostly because when I started, she was the one that taught me all my basic skills, the falls and, how to fall properly and how to block. And then as far as who I wanted to be when I grew up, it was more Switchblade Rosie, because I saw so many qualities in her that she wasn't just a blocker, she wasn't just a jammer, she was able to do both. And I'm like, if you can do both, I think that makes you a more valuable player, and that's kind of what I strived for, was to basically be an all-around good player, not good at one thing or the other, good at both.
Okay, oh, very cool. So two different people you look up to on the team for different reasons. I can identify with the want to be more versatile. Very cool. All right, the next question we have is dealing with race. Has anyone ever treated you differently on or off the track because you're Puerto Rican? Or let me prep before we say that. I use the term Puerto Rican descent when I told my students, and I don't know if you use that term to identify yourself, or you just say you're Puerto Rican or Puerto Rican American, or how you identify yourself.
I usually just identify myself as Puerto Rican because I do have that strong heritage in my family. And as far as being treated differently, I've never really noticed myself being treated differently. Just because people are like, oh, obviously my name is Rican Rage, and I tend to wear the Puerto Rican flag, so it's kind of like, people are like, oh, you're Puerto Rican, that's kind of cool. So I've never really had any sort of prejudice against me being Puerto Rican. I definitely see that a lot of minorities are coming to the sport more now than in the beginning. But yeah, I've never really been treated any differently.
Okay. And so Rican Rage, let's back up a little. So why did you choose the name Rican Rage?
Well, in the Puerto Rican community, it's all about who you are. You are, even if you are a very, very small amount of Puerto Rican, you're going to identify with that because it's very strong, and everybody is like, oh, you're Puerto Rican, that's cool, you're part of our family. If I met somebody on the street and they were Puerto Rican, they'd probably invite me to their house. We would probably have food and drinks because that's just how the Puerto Rican family is. They're very family because of the history and the culture. And as far as the rage part, I've always kind of had an attitude. So that kind of came naturally. So I wanted to put, who I was into, a name. And I wasn't really into putting my name into it. It's kind of boring. And
Oh, yeah.
so I wanted, something that was strong and fierce. And, I wanted to be a fierce competitor. So I think that Rican Rage is kind of, very strong and powerful.
You think that attitude that you brought to Derby has helped you
Yes,
quite a bit?
I do, because a lot of the girls that are new think I'm like scary and mean, and I'm really not. But I think it brings something to the table as far as gameplay.
Oh yeah, definitely. You definitely have to have that attitude to be, at least in the game, and I guess scaring the new girls is also an added benefit. So, I think you might have already hit on this next question. So, in roller derby communities more broadly, do you think race is an issue?
Race in general, yes.
Okay.
I've seen it a lot more. I hate to say this, in the southern states.
Oh, that makes
I've not
sense.
played much up north or on the coast, but I have seen with our team in general some race issues come up with one of our African American skaters and white refs having a problem with them.
Ah, so the refs actually making bad calls or not making enough calls.
Yeah, as far as, before the game even starts, sometimes we've had a couple occurrences where we write our numbers on our arms in Sharpie. And of course, on dark skin, it's kind of hard to see sometimes.
Sure.
And we've never had a problem until one game where one of the refs was like, I can't see your number, you need to write it in a different color.
Ah.
And so that's kind of been an issue a few times with
Yeah,
a couple of different refs.
And the students and I watched a documentary about roller derby through the 50s and the 70s, and this of course was during the civil rights era. There was huge problems when they traveled to the South, and I wouldn't be surprised if those problems still persist. So moving back to the first line of questioning, what has been your favorite moment or a highlight in your derby career?
Favorite moment or highlight? I actually have a lot of favorite moments because as you progress as a skater, this is my third season. Within my first season, I would say my highlight was at the end of the year, we do an award ceremony and we have all kinds of things from, biggest lush to most improved to fan favorite. And my first season, I got rookie of the year.
Cool.
And I thought that was like a big thing for my team to say, you're an up and coming skater, you're going to do great things.
Yeah.
We believe in you. But just, every time, I get a trophy for being MVP, that tells me that I'm doing well and other people see that I'm doing well. So that's always a highlight, knowing that what I put into it, people are noticing.
And you mentioned earlier about wanting to be the well-rounded skater who can jam and can block. As far as the MVPs go, do you get those usually for jamming or usually for blocking?
I've gotten both.
Oh, okay. So you definitely aspire to that well-roundedness.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've gotten MVP blocker, I've gotten MVP jammer. Sometimes they just do MVP all around.
Oh, gotcha.
And so sometimes, it wasn't my jamming skills, wasn't my blocking skills. It's kind of hard to know for those whether, which part of it that I got the trophy for.
Very cool. Let me see here. The last question that the students had is, what do you think is the biggest popular misunderstanding about roller derby? And how would you clarify, or how would you answer that?
There's a lot of misunderstandings with roller derby. Anytime people see me wearing roller derby and ask me questions, they all want to know if we throw elbows, if we punch people in the face, if we trip them and kick them. People just think that roller derby is this giant, mosh pit of people just beating each other up. They don't understand that it is a physically grueling sport. I mean, those 2 minutes of a jam are the hardest 2 minutes, you know? And when you have to go back to back to back, you are physically exhausted, you know? Marathon runners prep for, you know, their marathon. They eat this, they do, you know, all these things. We're a sport just like any other sport where we have commitment, we have hard work and dedication and, you know, all these goals we're trying to beat. And, you know, people think that it's just, you know, oh, anybody can do it, you know. It's easy to just get out there and skate around and, you know, push down a girl. They think it's, you know, us shoving girls down on the floor, and it's just, it's not. It's so much more.
And you guys make it look a lot easier. I know when I started playing, you guys have trained so much that you make it look easy to do, and it absolutely isn't from my perspective after I've started playing. But I definitely agree with you that there's that there's a problem with people thinking that roller derby is closer to WWF, you know, wrestling and the fake type of wrestling than it is to a real sport. But it's absolutely technique, training, and the same stuff that comprises every other sport. Yeah. Well, I think that is all the questions that the students had for you, and I want to thank you again for doing this interview. Thank you very much, Rican Rage, and I'll sign off here.